the same time, people don't get angry about things that do matter. Go to a game and watch the way that people behave. You know that guy, the one who gets really angry with the referee? I don't think his anger has that much to do with the ref. He hasn't given his life to make the world a better place, and he's wasting it, and he knows it, even if he wouldn't say it that way. So he goes to the game and he shouts and he boos and his face turns red and he gets all upset with the referee. But the truth is, some people are looking for a fight because they aren't in one. The people I know who are most engaged with the suffering of the world, the people I know who have given themselves to big, beautiful, healing kinds of causes, they're generally free from that irrational, petty kind of anger. They don't fall into the trap of that low-grade rage that actually increases the brokenness of the world. Are you one of those people? Or maybe we should ask your friends, or your husband, or your wife, or your boyfriend, or your girlfriend, or your coworkers. We should ask your kids, because they'll tell us, because they know. If you're one of those people, the question is, some people say, well, I just have a temper. No. You have things going on inside of you that you aren't dealing with.
So I came in this morning and I had my sermon prepared and things I want to share with you, and Sean says, hey, I've got this video. I thought of you. Thought of you. Thanks, Sean. All right, so there are going to be some times today during the sermon where I'm going to ask you to turn to your neighbors and talk just a little bit, because it should be a little bit interactive. I don't want to just be the only talker today, so we're going to start with this. I'd like you to do an exercise that's going to challenge you. It's going to make some of you frustrated, but that's okay. If you could narrow down Christianity to just a single word, the essence of Christianity, if it were possible to do that, what is Christianity in a single word? Being a follower of Christ, what is that in a single word? I want you to come up with that word right now and turn to your neighbor and tell your neighbor what you think that is. Go ahead and do that. What is Christianity in a single word? From up here, I can't hear all of your responses, but I'm going to guess that some people said things like love. It's a good answer. Some people probably said things like grace. Another good answer. Some people probably said things like forgiveness, and that's another good answer. But as we go through the sermon today, I want you to come back to that question, because it's a very important question. Not that you ever have to define anything in one simple word, because that's really difficult to do, especially something as big and deep and rich as Christianity. To narrow that down to one word is difficult, but I want to come back to that idea, because sometimes we just need to narrow our faith down to simplicity, because Jesus really makes it pretty simple. He's very cut and dry. And we'll come back to those ideas in a few moments. But first I wanted to share a story with you today about a hunting trip. Billy Martin, in his book, Number One, he tells a story of a hunting trip on which he went with Mickey Mantle. Okay, two baseball players. For those of you who are a little bit younger and don't know, these guys played back in the 60s. And Billy Martin was known as a coach especially for really having a hot temper. He would get out there and kick dirts on umpires and throw bases over the fence. And Billy tells this story in his book, Number One. He said that he and Mickey had gone down to Texas, where Mickey had a friend who owned a ranch. And Mickey frequented this ranch, and he would go out and hunt on the ranch. And this particular trip, he invited Billy to come with him. So Billy and Mickey made their way down to Texas, and when they arrived at the ranch, Mickey said, hey, I'll tell you what, wait in the car. I'm just going to go in and check in with my friend, make sure we have permission, and then we'll get to some hunting. And Billy sat in the car. Mickey went inside and opened the door, and of course he greeted his friend. His friend greeted him with a hug, and he said, hey, it's great to see you. I love you. And Mickey said, hey, would it be okay if we hunted on the land today? And the friend said, well, of course, man. Go ahead, have a great time, but I do have a favor to ask. And so Mickey said, okay, well, what's the favor? And Mickey's friend said, I've got this mule who's going blind. It's out in the barn. It's been going blind for quite a while, and I just don't have the heart to kill this animal. when you're out there today, do you think you can go down to the barn and could you put this animal out of its misery? And Mickey said, yeah, I can do that for you. And Mickey was known to be a little bit of a practical joker. He was kind of a prankster. He would be great on the youth trip in Kentucky. Mickey walked back out to the car, and he put on a scowl, and he huffed on his way out to the car, and he slammed the door, and as he got into the car, he jerked the car into gear, and he sped off like a maniac, and Billy turned and said, Mick, what's wrong? What's going on? And Mickey said, he won't let us hunt on his land. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm so mad. I'm going to go out. I'm going to shoot one of that guy's animals. That's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going down to his barn. I'm going to shoot one of his mules. Well, Mickey drove off like a wild man, dust flying behind the car, bouncing over rocks and holes in the dirt road. And of course, Billy protested, hey, Mick, wait a minute. I don't think we can do this. I don't think we can just go down there and shoot this guy's animal. Come on, let's think about this. So they finally arrive at the barn, and before the cars even come to a complete stop, Mickey flings the door open, and he jumps out of the car, and he's got his rifle flailing, and he stomps into the barn, and he shoots the animal. As Mickey comes back out to the car, he makes his way out, and he notices that there's no one in the car. And pa! Pa! Mickey hears 2 shots fire out. So Mickey runs back to the barn, where he finds Billy Martin standing with a smoking rifle. And he says, Billy, what are you doing? Billy goes, we'll show him. I just shot 2 of his cows. There's no doubt that anger can be dangerously contagious. It can be contagious. In fact, if you have a Bible, please open it up to the book of Proverbs today. This series that we're doing for the next couple of weeks deals with the Proverbs, God passing along wisdom to us. And today we'll be in Proverbs chapter 22. And we'll look specifically at verses 24 and 25. You can see them on the screen if you don't have a Bible. And Proverbs reads this way: don't befriend angry people or associate with hot-tempered people, or you will learn to be like them and endanger your soul. Let's pray. God, you are wise. We are not. But you pass along your wisdom through the Scriptures, and sometimes, Lord, through the trials of our lives and in our prayer time. And God, we're grateful for it because we need your wisdom. God, I need your wisdom today. I need your wisdom to share your truth. And each of us needs your wisdom as we take that truth and share it with the rest of the world. So God, we're grateful that you give us wisdom, but we ask today that you fill us with it. And we ask those things in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, most people would look at this proverb and they would see the warning that we should not hang around people who are hot-tempered, that we should not congregate and spend our time with those people who anger easily. And they'd be wise to heed that warning. But the thing I love about God's Word is that it is so much deeper and richer and more personal. When we look at nearly every verse of the Bible, we can go so much deeper, and there's something there that's just for you and just for me, because God is speaking to each and every one of us. And as I read that proverb, I want to look at it from a different angle. That verse provides good advice to us to keep our distance from people who get angry and become hot-tempered. But what if I'm the angry person? What if I'm the one who's hot-tempered? What if I'm the one who struggles with self-control? Is there something here for me? Is there some wisdom for me, God? And the answer is yes. Now, I need your help this morning. In order to make sense of this, I need you to walk down a path with me. Can I get you to do that? We walk down an intellectual path. Can I? Oh, okay. Remember, it's interactive. Start with this question. Why am I here? Or maybe better yet, why do I exist? In fact, why do I still exist? And why do you exist? In fact, why does any believer still exist? A good chunk of my life was spent coming to the realization that I'm a sinner, and I need the forgiveness that only comes by way of God's grace, that only comes when I accept the forgiveness that God offers through the death and resurrection of his Son, Jesus Christ, and my faith in that fact, because it is a fact. The forgiveness that could only be purchased by Jesus' perfect blood poured out on the cross at Calvary. The forgiveness that could only be realized when Jesus rose from the dead and walked out of that tomb. The forgiveness that I could only obtain by submitting my life to and willingly following Jesus Christ. But like many of you who are sitting here today, I've already made those decisions. I've already submitted my life to Jesus. So why didn't God sweep me up and take me straight to heaven the moment I received his grace? Before I worked at my current school, at Hillcrest High School, I taught for 7 years in the Palatine School District. And we had 20 schools in the district. There were 15 elementary schools, there were 4 junior high schools, and there was 1 alternative school, and I worked at the alternative school. And I taught a class there for kids who had been kicked out of their schools. They came to me to learn math and science and writing and reading and spelling and history and all those good things. And in addition to those things, I also taught 3 classes. One was on character development, one was on empathy training, and one, believe it or not, was on anger management. And while I was at that school, I was fortunate because the school had the district, I should say, had a lot of money. And one program they had was where we built a space shuttle. We converted a school bus into a space shuttle. We partnered with Northrop Grumman, who was a local business in the Palatine area. We converted a school bus into a space shuttle. We converted a mobile home into a mission control. And we would drive these things to each of the different schools, and we would train the kids to do launches. We would train the kids to do space missions. And so some of the kids would be out in mission control, some would be on board the shuttle, and they had headsets and everything. It was great, it was lots of fun. And part of my training for that was, I spent a week at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and I took some classes on aeronautics and space stuff and physics and math and stuff like that. And so that was a really cool experience. When I came back, one of the things I got to do that was really awesome was I got to meet some of the Apollo astronauts. Our district had its own TV studio. I mean, it was a real cable station that just broadcast to our district. And each year we would invite an Apollo astronaut to come and visit and do an interview and take phone calls from each of the schools where they could talk directly to the kids. And I was just lucky. I don't know if nobody wanted the job or what, but they came to me and they said, hey, will you host this show? So I was Oprah for a day. And I got to meet Charlie Duke. Charlie Duke is a man who walked on the moon during the Apollo 16 mission. I got to meet and interview Harrison Jack Schmitt. He was a man who walked on the moon during the Apollo 17 mission. I even got to meet James Lovell, whose quote you probably know, "Houston, we have a problem." He was a member of the Apollo 13 mission, and he never made it to the moon, but he was happy just to make it back to the Earth. And when I talked to these men and asked them about their missions, I learned some neat things, but more than that, more than their space missions, I asked them about their lives. And I asked each one of them, I said, man, when you come back from the moon, when you come back from either orbiting or stepping on the moon, where do you go from there? You've kind of peaked. And I think that question is relevant to all of us. It's not just astronauts. Consider for a moment, where does the climber go after she's reached the highest peak? Or where does the Olympian go after she's broken all the records and received her gold medals? And more importantly, where does the Christian go after he's been made righteous by God's redeeming grace? And for most of us who sit in the room today, that's true. We've already been made righteous through God's redeeming grace. There's nothing else for the Christian to achieve personally. He cannot be made better, more beautiful, stronger, richer, or more perfect than he is at the moment God's grace and righteousness fills and covers him. I love the song that the worship team just sang. They sang a song that said, "Your love, O Lord," and they said it reaches to the heavens. And they said, your righteousness, God, your righteousness fills me. I will never get better than I am today. I will never get better than I was the moment that God's righteousness filled me. Because in the only eyes that matter, God's eyes, I was perfect. Isaiah 61 says it this way. Isaiah 61:10 says, I am overwhelmed with joy in the Lord my God, for he has dressed me with the clothing of salvation and draped me in a robe of righteousness. In 2 Corinthians, we find this verse. Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. For he, as the Father, made him, Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin for us, and hear this now, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. In God's eyes, I am every bit as righteous as he is. That's amazing. I will never get better than that. There's nothing more that the Christian can do to improve herself after she has accepted the grace God offers through faith in Jesus Christ. She's perfect and righteous in the only eyes that matter, God's eyes. And so again I ask, why didn't God just sweep us up the moment we decided to accept Christ and take us straight to heaven? And that's not a rhetorical question. This is one of those interactive moments. I want you to turn to your neighbor again and see if you can answer that. Why didn't God sweep you and sweep me straight to heaven the moment we accepted Christ's righteousness? Turn to your neighbor and see if you can figure out that answer. That was cool. I've been up here and I've had a chance to preach a number of times. That was cool. People really turned and started talking to one another. That was awesome. I like that. Tell you one thing I'm really proud of. I get to serve here as the youth pastor, and one thing I'm very proud of is that whether you found that answer or not, every member of our youth group could tell you right now. And so if you didn't know the answer, turn to Sam or to Kaylee or to EJ or to Devin or Dakota or Jack or Jerry or Ben. Turn to those guys and you ask them, if I missed one of you, I'm sorry. You turn to them and you ask them, why did God leave us here after we became saved? EJ, why did he do it? That's right. I don't know if you could hear EJ, but I'm going to paraphrase what he said. He said the reason is because there is still work to be done here. There's work to be done here. What work? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's not the kind of work that will improve you or improve me. We're not here to build bigger, fancier churches. We're not here to read our Bible so we can know God more. We're going to know him in heaven face to face and more personally than we ever could on earth. We're not here just to pray more. We're going to talk to God in person, face to face. We'll hear his voice. We'll see his facial expressions in heaven. These endeavors all have value, but make no mistake, they are not the mission. They are a means by which we might achieve the mission, but we can't be confused or misled. They are not the mission. The mission is not merely to build more or pray more or read more. Too often we build and pray and read and improve us. The mission is not to build and read and pray so that we might be informed, but we do those things so that our families and friends and neighbors might be transformed. The mission is to make disciples. I'll say it again. The mission is to make disciples. Next slide, if you will, Eric. The very last thing Jesus said to his disciples before he returned to heaven was this. You find it in Matthew 28, and it's very personal to our youth group because this is our mission. Jesus said this. He said, I've been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you. And be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And will you leave that up there, Eric? This is important. Jesus starts out by saying, I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. What he's saying is, I'm the boss. I'm the boss. And I'm not giving you good advice. I'm not giving you wise counsel. I'm not making a suggestion. I am telling you, I am ordering you, I am commanding you to go and make disciples of all the nations. And that doesn't just mean some deep, dark jungle in Africa. It starts right outside here in Mokena, and Frankfurt, and Tinley, and Orland, and Manhattan, and wherever you live. It starts there, and it reaches the deepest, darkest jungles in Africa. Jesus said, I've been given this authority. I'm the boss. Now do what I told you. That's our mission. And it's assuring to know that Jesus said, I'll be with you. I will be with you. The mission, my friends, is to make disciples. And so the answer to why God did not simply sweep us up the moment we were made righteous by faith in Jesus is because we are to make disciples. And that's it. We Christians have no other purpose than to make disciples by loving and serving our brothers and sisters and teaching them the good news. My career, it doesn't really matter to God unless I'm making disciples inside it. My sports, my hobbies, my clubs, my activities, they don't really matter to God unless I am making disciples inside them. My home doesn't matter to God unless I'm making disciples inside it. In fact, my role in my family as a husband, as a father, doesn't really matter unless I am making disciples inside my family. Because the mission is to make disciples. By now you might be confused. You're probably thinking that you were led to believe today's sermon was going to be on anger. You know, the Billy Martin story was about anger. The proverb I shared was about anger. Some of you are getting angry that this has taken so long. The fact is that today's sermon is about anger, but I find it really important, in fact, so important, that we always have a context for the advice and counsel and teaching that we pastors give. The context of every word spoken from this pulpit at Grace Fellowship Church must always be loving God, living genuinely, and loving others. The context is to make disciples. Loving God and living genuinely and lifting others is how we make disciples. Now, don't get me wrong. We have a responsibility to pursue and practice obedience in God's commands. We have an obligation to pursue and practice the disciplines of following Jesus. No question. Yes, we are to live our lives as disciples of Jesus Christ, but I believe what other pastors like Kyle Eidelman and Francis Chan and David Platt are teaching, and they're teaching that the only real disciple is a disciple maker. Now, if you're thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm not a pastor, you don't have to be. If you're thinking, I'm not a missionary, well, you sort of are. Because remember your mission field, we said it starts in your front yard, and it extends to the deepest, darkest jungles. All of us are on that mission, and that makes us missionaries. Today we're talking about anger. Next week I'll talk to you about family. A couple weeks from now, Pastor Bob will talk about placing others first. Mike's going to preach this summer about purity. But every topic we preach must always be meant to make us better disciple makers. Some of you know Craig Ashley. Craig Ashley is the guy with the beautiful shirt in the sound booth back there today. Craig has served our teen ministry now for, 6-7 years, and he's been a lot of fun for us to have, and he helps us out there. And he and his wife Angie have become friends to my family and me. And recently, my wife and kids were in Sheboygan. They were in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and I was here at home. And so that evening, I asked Craig and Angie if they wanted to go out and have dinner. And so we went out and we had dinner together. And during our meal, Angie shared her first impression of me. She shared the first impression she had of me. See, I was a new guy to Grace Fellowship Church just about 11 years ago. I was the new guy here at church, and some of the guys asked me if I would participate on the church's softball team, and I was happy to oblige. And, I'm a halfway decent athlete and super, super competitive. And As I recalled those times, I remembered hitting quite a few home runs. Yeah, I thought of dashing from first to third on a mere grounder to the pitcher. I thought about making some sensational diving catches in the outfield and throwing some laser beams from left field to home where our catcher waited to tag the opponent before he could score. Now, if you're worried today that I need a dose of humility, don't, because Angie provided it. She didn't remember those things. In fact, what Angie said is, when we came out to those games and watched the team play, Craig and I went home and we privately agreed that the new guy was kind of a jerk. They were right. I was the guy that you heard about in the video today. Nearly every game I argued with the umpires. I squawked and squealed about this call and that call, and it got pretty ugly. But as I look back, I got angry, and it's not just there. I've always been this way with sports. I got angry because my mission was to win. Not souls, mind you. It was to win a meaningless game. Consider what went through people's minds as they watched me out on the field. And this part's not funny. This is serious. Consider what went through people's minds, maybe even yours if you were there. Non-believers thinking, man, if that's what a Christian looks like, I don't want to be one. New believers thinking, hey, it's okay to treat others with anything other than love. Church seekers who would never step inside Grace Fellowship Church because I bore its name on my jersey. A league supervisor who would never even consider asking me to pray or give a testimony before or after a game. Parents who would never allow their children to come to our youth group under my leadership. Or a couple of young Christians who might never have served our youth because the new guy was kind of a jerk. My anger had effectively crippled my ministry. It had stifled my opportunity to speak to people's hearts and lives. But when I live inside the mission of making disciples, I no longer care if I win or lose the game. I no longer care if I feel cheated by ignorance or even malice. In fact, I welcome those opportunities because that's my chance to show God's grace and forgiveness and witness for Him. Paul did. Paul was in jail. And Paul said he counted it pure joy to suffer for Christ. Why? Who's going to go to jail and say, man, I count this pure joy, glad to be suffering? But it gave him access to people's hearts and to their lives so that he might teach Christ to them. And that's what making disciples really comes down to. Gaining access to people's hearts and lives so that we can share the good news with them. But what lock did anger ever open? And what heart did anger ever win? We're going to put some quotes up here. Ambrose Bierce said this. He said, "Speak when you are angry, and you will make the best speech you'll ever regret." Marcus Aurelius said this. He said, "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it?" William Arthur Ward said, "It is wise to direct your anger toward problems, not people, to focus your energies on answers." And I would add to what William said here, because, brothers and sisters, I do not believe there is any problem in this world to which Jesus is not the answer. He is the answer to every problem. Plato wrote, "There are only two things a person should never be angry at: what they can help and what they cannot." And if I could revise that, I would say it this way. There are only two things a Christian should never be angry at: whom they can help and whom they cannot. Because we have a responsibility to help people. But getting back to the scriptures, Jesus' brother James, in the book of James, chapter 1. James said this. He said, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. You know, if we made a continuum up here, if I had like a timeline type of thing, a number line, on one side you would have anger. And all the way at the other end, you would have forgiveness. And the two could not be farther apart. And so we have to ask the question of one another, have to ask the question of ourselves, how can I demonstrate God's forgiveness if I'm stuck in the midst of anger? Proverbs chapter 16 says, he who is slow to anger is better than the mighty.